Joining me now with a legal perspective on all of this is criminal defense attorney and anchor at Law and Crime Network, Bob Bianchi. Bob, I appreciate you being with me to discuss this. So Ghislaine is getting 20 years behind bars. I'm of the opinion that that is not long enough when you think about the systemic trafficking of underage girls, the rape and other forms of sexual abuse that took place for years and years and years. This was just a pure evil. I watched a documentary on the whole thing and it was just sickening. From a legal perspective, is 20 years, is that an average sentence for being found guilty of aiding and abetting in a crime like this?
I was expecting a lot more, to be honest with you, Addison, and prosecutors were seeking up to 50 years. Now, what we have is a sentencing code. There's guidelines, and what happens after a person is convicted is it's reviewed by the probation department. And the probation department is an independent body, and they're the ones that came up with the 20-year sentence. What they do is they calculate the nature of the crime. It's got a guideline range, and then they have what they call, basically aggravating or mitigating factors in the case that they can add on. We call them enhancements. And based upon what you just said, Addison, the fact that this has gone on for such a long time, the number of victims that are involved, the sophistication of the plan, the abuse itself, I would expect even if it was just one victim, maybe a 20-year sentence. But given the gravity and nature of this and her grooming these people for Jeffrey Epstein and his crew, I thought warranted a departure up to where the prosecutors were seeking in the 50-year range. Bottom line here is that you do about 85% of that time before you're released. She is basically looking at getting out in 17 years. She could see the light of day again. So I'm a little surprised that it was only 20 years.
Yeah, especially this just came across my desk. There was a man convicted of kidnapping and raping homeless women in Denver, Colorado. He was just sentenced to life in prison on 3 counts of sexual assault, 2 counts of second-degree kidnapping, 4 counts of soliciting for prostitution, and 1 count of attempted sexual assault, 1 count of unlawful sexual contact, and 1 count of theft. If you ask me, that's justice. That's justice, right? Such a heinous crime, getting life in prison. How does someone like this, who obviously did these horrible things, but did it at a much less rate than Ghislaine Maxwell did, how is it that someone like this is handed a life sentence and Ghislaine Maxwell is handed only 20 years? Is it because of her prestige? Is it because she's in Hollywood? Does she have ties with the prosecutors? Is there something nefarious at play here?
Well, Addison, you hit a very significant legal nerve, if you will, that goes on with cases. I myself was saying when this sentence was handed out that there are people that are picked up on lesser offenses and do more time than what Ghislaine Maxwell got. So you are 110% correct. Sometimes the sentencings, in my opinion, in federal court are over draconian, if you will, very, very serious. And so that it doesn't make any sense why this was only a 20-year sentence. I don't think that the judge, again, remember the probation department is the one that recommended this. I don't think there's anything nefarious like connections or things of that nature, but you point out the fact that judges see things differently, and depending on the judge you could get a very harsh sentence, or even Ghislaine Maxwell could go to a different judge that would have sentenced much more time. That's the nature of the system and the discretion that these judges have. And let's not forget, Addison, in this case, the whole idea that Jeffrey Epstein was on the radar decades ago, and that whole debacle where that case got squashed and he only had to do a little jail time, I mean, that is one in which the U.S. attorney, I believe it was meeting outside of the office with his defense attorney, having lunch, and then later wound up, I think, working for that law firm. I forget all the facts of it, but I remember looking at it saying, wow, that is definitely a situation in which Jeffrey Epstein played the system. But as far as Ghislaine Maxwell, I think you had a judge that felt that this was an appropriate balance. I just disagree with the, like you do, with the nature of it, given the gravity and comparison like you're bringing out with other cases. 20 years, in my opinion, is too light.
Yeah, thankfully, Ketanji Brown Jackson wasn't the one handing down the sentence, or else Ghislaine might have just gotten something to the equivalent of a parking ticket. But that said, Bob, one aspect of this case that is sorely lacking, in my opinion, is the clients of this sex trafficking ring. this has gone very unaddressed, very underreported. No one seems to be poking and prodding into it, including the court in this case. Why are names not being named? Why is there not being more attention shed on this, especially in the court of law? That was because Epstein was a very high-profile individual. He had ties with the Clintons. He had ties with all of Hollywood, a lot of members in the Democrat Party, prominent politicians, and a lot of these people we know flew to his private island, and yet none of the clients of Epstein, none of the people that he brought to his island, they're being completely left out of this. Why is that, do you think?
I don't know, Addison. I mean, I get the idea why investigators would not release names unless they were going to charge somebody. So the real question in my mind comes down to, why are these people not being charged? Again, it gets back to the point you were kind of raising before. When you have these cases that go on every day where people have an encounter, I'll give you an example, with somebody who's under the statutory age and they believe that the person was of age, right? So it's a strict liability crime, they call it. Doesn't make a difference if they told you they were 18 or over the age 18. And they showed you identification. It's a strict liability crime. If the person is under the statutory age, in New York it's 17, in New Jersey it's 16, each state's a little bit different, then they come down like a ton of bricks on these people and are seeking lengthy jail sentences that quote unquote send the message that you better be sure that person is legal. I get that. So it goes to your point though, well, you have very well-connected, wealthy, high-powered individuals that are going to this island and taking advantage of these young women. How come they're not being treated like the people are being treated every single day in state court that don't have famous names, aren't rich and wealthy, but they're going to jail because they had sex with somebody under the statutory age? I do not know the answer as to why they're not being pursued, but I know as a prosecutor, when I was a prosecutor, if I had a case where this was a systemic conspiracy to bring underage girls onto an island for people to abuse them, I would be going after those individuals who had sex with those girls without any question. And at that point, of course, obviously the name should be released because it's a matter of public record. Just last point, as a prosecutor, however, if I didn't feel I had the evidence, I wouldn't release that information.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, and that does make sense. Now, Bob, we're almost out of time, but I have to get your thoughts on this real quick. This is from Bloomberg News. Abortion groups are turning to state legal fights after the Roe ruling. So organizations like Planned Parenthood, ACLU, they're plotting lawsuits. 13 states had trigger bans. So once Roe versus Wade was overturned, several states completely outlawed abortion, and as a result, obviously, people like Planned Parenthood are trying to take legal action. They're trying to block some of these laws. Do you see them being successful in some of these efforts or in any of these efforts to stop these states from passing anti-abortion legislation?
I don't. I mean, I think the states are going to be given tremendous authority to be able to decide for themselves whether or not and to what extent they're going to allow abortion, if at all. And given the Supreme Court ruling, I think that basically the Supreme Court has given its imprimatur or its approval to do that. You know, we get back to a states' rights issue. They took it out of the hands without federal legislation or a constitutional change. Addison, I don't think that these Planned Parenthood attempts to try to circumvent the Supreme Court ruling are going to have any judicial effect. I think they'll probably lose in court based on the Supreme Court's ruling last week.
I certainly hope so. Well, Bob, we are out of time. Thank you so much for breaking all of this down, providing a legal analysis. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you.